everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right, my guest today is the president of the Observer Research Foundation, Sameer Saran. Sameer is also the curator of the Raisina Dialogue and the chair of CYFY. If you don't know what it is, you can go and check out in the description of the podcast. Sameer, thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, Kushal, for having me. It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while, and I hold that against you on that. Yes.
I'll be more regular now.
Yes. So, Sameer, first of all, I want to, before we start talking about various subjects, I want to congratulate you because you guys have successfully finished and completed Raisina Dialogues 2022. It was, as always, the quality of discussions were fantastic. So, maybe this is my starting salvo. So, there was one particular discussion, Sameer, as I was telling you offline, that was held this year. And that really stood out to me, and it was about liberalism, right? And obviously one of the panelists was the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. So if I was to start, there are two major issues hovering around right now in the world. We are obviously in this post-COVID world, or currently COVID world, and then there is the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And in a very absurd sort of a way, even COVID has been in its own way a real test, if you ask me, of liberalism and liberal values. As in, liberal values, if from what I understood, was always leaving the people alone. And COVID really tested the resolve of the world as to how far that the state can get into our lives. So maybe we can start from there. So how do you look at, in your own way, the state of liberalism in the current world?
Kushal, let me first start with Raisina, and maybe I'll use that as the point of departure to respond to your question. Since it's a freewheeling conversation, you'll have to deal with my mind going a little, moving too laterally in some sense to answer simple questions. Raisina this year was difficult. It was a difficult exercise for a number of reasons. On the logistics side, we have to realize that the pandemic has really challenged some of our arrangements of the past. We thought getting a person picked up from the airport and taking him to the room was a simple task, right? It has been done a million times over. But suddenly now you have people who have left that job and they have moved to different greener pastures because hospitality was badly damaged by the pandemic, right? So now you have new faces, newcomers, new hotel staff, new cab industry folks. The logistics have been so deeply affected that I think many of us will have to work very hard to get things back to normal. It's not coming back in real is not as easy as it was going online. And I think all of us, and therefore kudos to every business owner, enterprise manager who is restarting and providing values and providing jobs and providing economic returns to the country, to his company, and to his or her staff. So I think it's not easy. So one is, for me, the biggest lesson of the pandemic was we have lost a cadre of expertise and we have to rebuild it quickly. And in that sense, there is an opportunity here and there is also a challenge here. And hopefully all the missteps in the hosting of Raisina were behind the curtains, and what you saw in front looked smooth enough. But believe you me, it was not easy coming back into the real world and hosting it with people. Now, of course, this was also being hosted in the backdrop of two important issues. One of them, like you rightly pointed out, is the living with COVID world. We are all living with COVID. I don't know whether we are post-COVID or pre-COVID or we have a wave coming ahead which is going to be even more devastating. But let's say that we are all living with COVID. It's called living with COVID world. And of course, the second is Ukraine. And both of them, in many ways, have tested some of our other assumptions about life. We are there for each other. Globalization works. Supply chains work. Vaccines will be available to all. Healthcare will be distributed equally. We will all rally in each other's support. What we saw during COVID was like each man or woman for themselves. We saw, the Darwin's world play out in real time over the past 2 years. We saw a developed world societies with great values and morals that they preach to others, hijack consignments of masks and medical products. We saw the more predictable nature of actions from the authoritarian world, where it was just about them and their regime stability rather than either about their own people or anyone else. So in that sense, We saw both of it play out quite acutely, quite intensely in the last few months, and therefore we have to start questioning whether globalization was a force for good, or was it basically a force for good for a few. And I think that question was starkly put forth for all of us to engage with. When you saw the vaccine map of the world, you clearly knew who was globalization serving. And the vaccine map of the world must remain a constant reminder to ourselves that we have a world of haves and have-nots. And we have also seen that the have-nots were not necessarily catered to at their weakest moments. When they needed most protection, it was still about protecting only the rich and the elite. And I think that's something that is going to remain with all of us. And by the way, all of us are guilty of this. It's not just geographically distributed, it is also distributed within countries. We saw this play out within and outside, and amongst communities and countries and geographies. That was the first. The second, of course, is Ukraine. Now, suddenly, not only has the pandemic told us that globalization favors a few, the Ukraine crisis tells us that global institutions are biased as well. Geography matters, right? You saw commentary after commentary. Oh, the Ukraine war is amongst Europeans. They are people like us. We have to respond differently. It's not about some battle happening in that savage part of the world, which we call the third world. It's not Afghanistan. It's not South Asia. It's not Africa. It's Europe, right? Not only was there greater public discourse around the battle, there was greater empathy for people who were suffering. Borders were opened up to let the migrants in. Who can forget the image of that, of boats drowning as they were fleeing Libya and trying to enter into dry ground? Who can forget those images? But here you have the countries triumphantly announcing, I am taking 50,000, 100,000, 1 million, 1.5 million refugees. So color mattered, your race mattered, your geography mattered. The level of public discourse and scrutiny and action and support and participation in the war efforts, etc., clearly is based on ethnicity and geography. The Afghanistan issue is not even 1 year old. People do not have food. Women do not have rights. It's a country under siege. Who cares? Because they are not people like us. So PLU, people like us, has a meaning even in geopolitics. It's not only about the parties you host, it is also about the geopolitical arrangements. So globalization was found wanting during the pandemic, and geopolitical responses, institutions, and approaches were found to be absolutely skewed in favor of a particular geography and people. Now, in this context, I think it is a fair question to ask: are we seeing the revenge of ideology? We had all, and that was the panel you were referring to, Kushal, the one where Prime Minister Harper was speaking. The question asked was that we had all assumed that certain basic rights, certain basic assumptions, certain basic ethics, certain basic arrangements would undergird the second half of the 20th century and much of the 21st. And we have found that to not be the case. And the debate that we were hosting was that is ideology back? Is the proliferation of a number of ideologies undermining the liberal order as it was referred to, or the neoliberal market-based frameworks that were meant to benefit most around the world? Are they being undermined by the return of parochialism, nationalism, subnationalism, religious fervor, linguistic fervor, region-based mobilizations? And that was the panel that was the one that you referred to, where Stephen Harper was speaking about liberalism. And I remember Stephen Harper speaking 2 years ago at Raisina. And in fact, in that, it was the opening panel again. And I think Prime Minister Modi was in the audience while he was speaking at that on that particular instance. And I remember him saying that, listen, India is not going to be a Western-style liberal society. India is going to define pluralism and liberalism on its own. It's going to be a self-defined, plural, large economy, large country, largest democracy. And he said it quite clearly. He was already hinting 2 years ago, before the pandemic and prior to the Ukraine crisis, that liberalism of the East, liberalism from the East, liberalism that will be defined by India's rise, will not necessarily follow the performer formats that we have seen in the Atlantic system. And I think that has come to bear. Coming back to Raisina, because it's my favorite subject, in many ways, Raisina symbolizes this new format of international relations, which is democratic and open and plural. In many ways, that is the India offering. As the foreign minister rightly said, this was Prime Minister's, in a sense, objective for us to create a Make in India, Make for the World platform. Now, what is, and in that sense, Raisina, which has been, of course, shaped by these two gentlemen who I referred to, basically offers you exactly the glimpse of the world that we feel comfortable in. What is the world that we feel comfortable in, that we invest into, as you, as Kushal, me, Sameer, and others? That yes, boss, we will have differences. Boss, we will disagree. We will not have ideological commonalities. But as long as we can have a conversation, we can give you a mic. Of course, you have to be smart and use the mic well. But the idea that I will not invite Taiwan, or I will not invite Iran, or I will not have Israel in the same room, or I will, cancel X country or Y country, is preposterous. We are going to have, at the Raisina, we had over 100 countries. All of the above were part of that collection. We had folks from Taiwan speaking there, from Iran speaking there, from Israel speaking there. We had 14 Russians speaking there. We had tens of Europeans speaking there. We had Americans there. We had all of them under the same roof. They may not talk to each other, but they certainly spoke to us. And in our gathering, they were all treated like our guests, given respect, given warmth, and given our traditional Indian-style hospitality. And in that sense, our liberalism is not going to be based on some digital binary assessment of value. Either you are pass or fail. I think we will have to accept that we will have a graded scale of relationships. We will align more to some and less to others. But to be forced to choose one end of the spectrum is not the liberalism that we will be espousing going ahead. We don't do it internally, where we have this whole range of folks, from realists to optimists to pessimists to probabilists. We have a whole range of folks who are commenting on our own affairs. We will have a similar range of commentaries overseas as well. So sorry for a very long answer to a very short question, but I thought maybe I'll just put this out there.
No. I think it's perfect. That's why podcasts are there for, right? We can have long answers. Now, I want to take this forward. You I think you've put it beautifully here, that you say that India's liberalism is going to be a reflection of Indian society, and Indian society, the essence of Indian society is its plurality. I think you hit the nail on the head, where Indian society, if people come from outside who are not used to this way of living, I see this happening with a lot of my friends when they visit India for vacations, and they sometimes meet me. What they call chaos in that sense, right? We call Leela, right? कृष्ण की लीला, जैसे हम कहते हैं ना, कि ये तो लीला है भाई, कि कृष्ण का खेल है, ये सारा खेल है. And do you think in a way that Raisina could this time showcase in its own way that, look, you guys might find it chaotic, that there are so many people of differing ideologies who may not be willing to talk each other. So where do you see India's role now as an active player, maybe in solving these dichotomies which exist in the world? So I'll give you an example. Now, I'm a sports fan. Now, Wimbledon is about to come up. Now, Wimbledon makes this absurd announcement that players from two countries are not going to be allowed to play. One is Russia, and I forget the name of the other country. I think it was Belarus. Belarus. Yeah. So no, we're not going to let you play at Wimbledon. Now, I find these kinds of things absurd, to be very honest, because just yesterday I saw the news of, let's say, Taliban announcing a new garb for women in their country. Now, they're not going to stop in that case. Now, if I was to say the current global police of the liberal order believed in a rules-based society or a morality-based society, then morality has to be equally applied, right? If we were to say that, but it never comes across. So do you think maybe the Indian model of I don't know what word would be the right word, where, yes, you said it correctly, that we may be more aligned at a value-based system with some people, but at the end of the day, a lot of times foreign relations are also transactional, because sometimes some transactions have to be done. So do you see the baby steps of that being taken finally?
So I think we are still a few years away from playing the role of an anchor or a hub that is able to influence others to start beginning to see the world in similar ways. For example, Pax Americana, when America dominated the world for a good 50 to 60 years post-war till, say, the financial crisis, a good 60-year time frame when Americans were the most influential global actor. They still are, but perhaps not to that extent. They're relatively less influential. It doesn't mean that they're not overwhelmingly influential. So I think that distinction must be understood. But in the heydays of the American way of life, we were all in some ways being shaped by the narratives emerging from America, whether it was the media industry. For example, we got to know more about Pakistan and Bangladesh and our other neighbors through American media than through our own. We were more influenced by American assessments of danger and risks in certain geographies than our own. American media, in many ways, defined global assessments of the world around them, in some sense. Now, of course, I may be certainly exaggerating it a little. We, of course, had a very robust system as well in the early years, commensurate to our size that of GDP and interest. But American media dominated global headlines and therefore global assessments of the world around us. Hollywood decided who our heroes were. Rambo and Rocky were everyone's heroes. Whether you were in Japan or India or in a country in the African continent or in Latin America or North America and Europe. So they decided what was good, what was nice, what was right, what was worth fighting for, what was worth defending, and how do we defend and protect all of that. So in that sense, American cultural industry was shaping our own sensibilities. Sometimes in a true Hollywood, eyeball grabbing manner, exhilarating way, and sometimes insidiously, silently, more subtly. But we were all influenced by this cultural and media landscape, largely emerging from New York and Los Angeles. And that was the reality of the world around us at that point of time. I don't think we are anywhere close to doing that, Kushal. To answer your question, to be someone who can propagate a certain way of assessing the world, you have to invest in the industrial and cultural industrial capabilities that are going to allow that to happen. And I don't think we are anywhere close to that. However, we certainly have a good start. Due to India being a land of storytellers. You are a storyteller. I am a storyteller. Hame mic de do, hum band nahi hote. We are all, our oral traditions, our narrative styled, intergenerational, historic transmissions. And this happens in families. Ki aapke pardada kya karte the. We know in minute details my great grandfather's life in my home. It's all through oral tradition. Koi likhit mein nahi hai. There's nothing here that I have in writing other than the kalam puja ke waqt, whatever we wrote on Vijay Devas, we used to write something, pen something down. So we had some scanty details, but our oral traditions have served the continent well, subcontinent well. We are a land of storytellers. There is a intrinsic capability that we have to tell stories. Of course, the stories that we have told till now through our movies and through our writings and through our poetry have appealed to vast segments of the world. Right? We are really popular in large parts. And our actors are cultural ambassadors in any case in many parts of the world. And increasingly, our new cinema is also finding resonance in the platform world. So in that sense, we have a start. But we have not yet taken this to the next level, Kushal. I believe in the next 10 years, as we move from $3 trillion to $10 trillion or $8 trillion, and we can have a separate debate on how far we will be in 10 years in terms of our GDP. Let me put it this way. We will have sufficient investments in our cultural industry, in our media industry, in our digital creative sector, where the Indian stories will eventually begin to exert themselves. Pretty much like the Korean stories have done in the last 5 to 7 years. If you look at, they are perhaps the breakout nation when it comes to the soft power or the cultural elements. And I think we are going to see that happen in the next 5 to 6 years. We don't have to wait for too long. Before 2030, we will be significant actors in the cultural space. And I think it is here where we require, and this is going to happen despite the government, in spite of the government, despite anything else. This is going to happen by the sheer 1.3 billion people who have stories to tell and now have a mic and a smartphone and a camera to narrate them. And you look at the creators industry on the YouTubers, for example. You look at the YouTubers, right? The chief business officer was telling me last year at Raisina that 60% growth in YouTube creators who earn more than 1 lakh rupees from YouTube just by creation of content. So 60% growth is the fastest growing geography in the world. Where no one is creating more content and putting it out there than Young India does. And Young India and smartphone is going to script a cultural future, whether we like it or not, whether we shape it or not, whether we invest in it or not. I think that's one reality. Strategically, we have to realize that this is happening. It is upon us. And now we have to see that how can we, in some sense, A, catalyze it. Second, gently nudge it in certain directions and make this more polysemic in its appeal to many more than just the traditional geographies in the Middle East or in the African continent or in the diasporic communities that are around the world. So I think our biggest strategic investment going ahead has to be to take the storytelling power of 1 billion Indians and make it propositional rather than chaotic, like you're saying. You're talking about the chaos. Right now, it is too diverse and dispersed to be directional. Can we create certain vectoral outcomes from a largely creative and undirected space? So we will need to leverage this in the days ahead. And the minute you try to curate it through a centralized mechanism, you lose the power of this creative sector. So the curation does not have to be through a command and control structure. Rather than it has to be in investing in the creative sectors, by giving scholarships for the digital technology and digital platform sector, by making this as appealing as being a banker and a hedge fund manager, by telling people that this is something for the future. The only thing that is never going to be replaced is human ingenuity. Invest in that, invest in this creative young group, and then start thinking about whether there is the India way. I'm again now citing the book of the foreign minister, but I think the India way is a aspirational goal for all of us. That do we have a format where, yes, while I may be aligned to say, for example, in a particular matter, the decisions that say the European Union or America or any other partner of ours might take, but I'm not going to adopt their way of condemning those who don't agree with me. So I think this binary, this Manichean dualism that is very Western, Occidental by design, good and bad and good and evil, is a very, very Occidental. हमारे यहाँ तो अगर आप हमारी किताबें पढ़ेंगे, we have a spectrum of tolerance. Where even our gods have told us that sometimes it is okay to be in a certain way. If you have to achieve the larger goal, sometimes you have to choose certain paths that in the Occidental assessments would seem retrograde, right? So we have a very broad spectrum of assessment of human behavior. We don't condemn them. We always believe in comebacks. We always believe in rebuilding and resetting, right? So that is some of the fundamental blocks. The axis of evil हमारे यहाँ नहीं चलता. हमारे यहाँ तो आप तो you will see that we are a far more graded society in our responses, in our assessments. And of course, my fear, of course, and I'll just leave it out there and then I'll turn it back to you, Kushal. My fear, of course, is that the binary nature of digital platforms is making us more polarized and more, as a society, forcing us to choose these binary options than we were designed to be doing. As a civilization, we have been far more graduated. As a platform user, we only have like or unlike or don't like or cancel. हमारी binary, ये digital technology हमारी binariness निकाल रहा है. It's trying to impose a layer of binary behavior on us, which we actually is not necessarily our behavior.
Yeah, and in fact, I was going to come to that, but before I talk about that, I want to first touch upon this piece you wrote. I think it was March 14th. Yes, March 14th. आपने लिखा था, the world is in flux. Self-reliance is vital. Now, I'll touch it upon this way. So you mentioned YouTube, right? Now, I'll give you an example. Now, I'll connect the binary value system, the tech platform, Atmanirbharta, and I'll plug in all of them together and I'll explain the problem. So,
And somewhere
recently,
I'm a मैं उतना complex नहीं हूँ बिल्कुल. Anyways, go ahead, Kushal. Sorry.
so I, as a content creator myself, had received this email from YouTube where they said, due to the war in Ukraine, and I'm quoting the email, we will pause monetization of content that exploits, dismisses, or condones the war.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
so now what happens is, first the Atmanirbharta point. Now today the world is going on YouTube. By the way, even I am aware that in the last 2 years the maximum growth is of Vimeo and Rumble. That is a separate issue, but still YouTube holds the biggest share of the market, that is of video based content creation. Now what happens is, their value systems may not be imposed in many ways on us, but are also getting imposed on many ways on us. Now, I'm not saying, look, I am not an expert on Russia, Ukraine. But my point is, as a content creator or as a podcast host, I should be in a position to host a discussion which might have the Russian perspective, right?
Correct.
I should be allowed to do that. But when I get ईमेल्स लाइक दिस एंड देन देयर इज, वो कहते हैं ना, लटकती तलवार हमेशा मेरे ऊपर है कि अगर मैंने ये डिस्कशन किया तो वो तलवार गिरेगी, मेरे चैनल का सर कट जाएगा एंड ओवरनाइट समझ लो आई एम मेकिंग दैट 1 लाख 2 लाख 3 लाख अ मंथ, वो बंद. This kind of thing scares me, and now I connect you to the self reliance bit. Now how does India, अगर सारे इंडियंस YouTube पे जा रहे हैं और YouTube इस तरीके से अपनी वैल्यू, ये एक एग्जांपल मैंने दिया है रशिया यूक्रेन का, बिकॉज दैट इज आवर डिस्कशन राइट नाउ, बट दे विल सटनली पुट their value system, which is less flexible, more binary, more black and white, unlike ours, which has a more flexible, plural way of looking at the world. In that case, how do we become Atmanirbhar in the tech space?
So, Kushal, we should be very scared, okay? And I hope everyone gets this. I think you've raised a very important question. And I don't think too many people think about it. They should. They should start thinking about this. In the 20th century, it was famously said by many people. I don't know the original owner of this line, but wherever he or she is, God bless them. It was famously argued that America's most powerful generals are General Ford, General Motors, General Electric, and General Atomics. They were America's most powerful generals. They were basically American corporations who were serving the American way of life, the American value system, homogenizing the world in the image of America, supporting activities that favored the God's own country, investing in and ensuring that alternate life choices or competition it did not gain traction. So, the joke was that corporate America was America's most powerful fighting force, and that in some sense contributed to Pax Americana. It's true today as well. I mean, look at the ease, look at the speed, look at the velocity of which in which they have been able to cancel Russia completely. Russia is cancelled. Kushal is not cancelled. Samir is not cancelled. Russia is cancelled. Boss, people keep talking about Russian propaganda. There's only one propaganda in our lives today. There's only one viewpoint in the world today. There is only one source of information in the world today. There is no Russian perspective out there. In the world we inhabit, in the world of YouTube, Facebook, Insta, every other platform that you think Kushal is good, you please send me a list also, maybe join karunga. But every other platform that you think is worth its while has cancelled Russia. हम उनका opera नहीं सुनेंगे, हम उनके ballets नहीं देखेंगे. Sorry, I'm breaking into my English mode, हाँ, तो I'm doing a comfortable chit chat with you. तो मैं थोड़ा prim and proper type का नहीं हूँ, मैं सिर्फ बता रहा हूँ कुशल. So we have seen the cancellation of a country. Now, listen. Personally, I think this war is unwarranted. I think any war is unwarranted, but this certainly is. There's an asymmetry. This is a superpower with thousands of warheads of nuclear weapons versus a state which has large geography but fledgling, etc., etc. I think it's unwarranted, unfair, wrong, bad, terrible. You can choose the adjective you want, right? You can choose whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a perspective. Please understand what I'm trying to say. That you may believe, you may assess, you may reach a conclusion that Russia is wrong, but tell me, in the world, have we ever achieved peace without hearing the other side? You have today, by cancelling Russia, made war the only option. As Wolfgang Ischinger of the Munich Security Conference, he was being harassed for inviting Russians to the conference by some others who were in that performative chorus, virtue signaling, and trying to basically cancel them from participation. And remember, he said it was someone from UK who had made a comment on his Twitter feed, and I really liked his response. He says, you will fight to the last Ukrainian. You only want to fight to the last Ukrainian. You guys are sitting in a distant land, and from Bay of Pigs to India's own, face-offs, our own face-offs in the subcontinent, to wars that have happened in between, to America talking to the Taliban and making peace with the Taliban. Has there ever been an alternative to a conversation? You did rounds and rounds and rounds of conversations to somehow normalize, socialize, and mainstream the Taliban. Right? After years of axis of evil and bombarding them to rubble and blah, 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 blah. My point is that how can you not be in a conversation and hearing a view, no matter how much you may despise it, no matter how much you may dislike it? Cancel culture at the level of geopolitics is a recipe for disaster. And I hope you are not pushing someone into a corner which might lead to really, really devastating outcomes. I just hope. So we should all be worried, because listen, what has happened to Russia can happen to us as well. Don't believe that the same powers that be who could cancel Russia will not cancel you. 2029, they decide our climate performance is not that good. We don't deserve to be online, and we don't deserve to be speaking on certain things. Kushalmehra will, and his YouTube channel will be deplatformed because he has done a discussion on climate mitigation and the hypocrisy of the West. You will have this title, because of which you will be removed from YouTube. Every person who would fight back against the lack of serious intent on and I'm taking climate as just as a example, that please understand that these 4 or 5 companies have acted in American interest. They are not transnational corporations. They are not global platforms. They are American platforms where you are a squatter. You are there as long as they want you to be there. If you think you have any other intimate relationship with these platforms, you are living in a fool's world. The platforms are extractive, exploitative, and you are currently a business model for them. Kushal Mehra's podcast is a business model for them. When Kushal Mehra's podcast challenges their ideological mainframe, you will be deplatformed. आप अपने आप को ओनर मत समझो, आप कोई 99 years की लीज में नहीं रह रहे हो इस प्लेटफॉर्म पे. Right? So I think today the time has come for all of us to realize that the most important of spaces that are indispensable for democracies, for liberal, plural, open societies, are the public spheres. If our public sphere is controlled, owned, and curated by someone else, the conversations that are allowed or disallowed will also be decided by them. And I think we should be really thinking about whether we want to invest so much on something that where we will always be outsiders and not co-owners or owners. And I worry about that. I worry about the frailty of public spheres around the world, which are depending on platforms which are headquartered elsewhere. And that was my piece that I had written on tech. Now on Atmanirbharta. Now, for me, this fear of mine should not result in irrational action. It does not mean that I ban the platforms, it only means that I assess them correctly. It means that what I use them for is the right use. My use case for each of them is correct. I cannot be counting on government reaching their citizen through platforms that it does not have a stake in. If I have to dispense critical information or services or benefits to my citizens, these cannot be the mediums of comms or connection to your citizens, right? हाँ, अगर आपको कल्चरल इंडस्ट्री में कुछ करना है, ठीक है. आपको political, policy और social inputs के लिए we will have to build. I mean, I've been telling people, MyGov.in, MyGov.in, for example. I'm just taking an example. You have MyGov.in. MyGov.in should be the place where a government notice board should be created. All critical information should be published only there. Get people into the habit of reading MyGov.in if they want to understand बिजली की क्या situation है, पानी की क्या situation है, election के क्या promises हैं. And it should be a all party. There should be a political public sphere. There should be a governance public sphere. There should be a emergency public sphere. All our COVID information should have been distributed through a notice board there, for example. But because you were also doing it in these other platforms, people were using them because of the ease of convenience, habit, etc., etc., etc. Right? So I think we will have to build other mediums which have a sovereign character, even as we benefit from these transnational mediums, largely headquartered out of the West Coast or increasingly from China also. So I think Atmanirbharta does not mean rejection of the other. It means a proper assessment of what you can do and what you cannot do with them. And that is the Atmanirbharta. In fact, the piece that you're quoting, Kushal, I argue that Atmanirbharta means even a more dense international engagement framework. Today, if I depend on 10 countries to be truly independent, I may have to depend on 100. I don't want 10 people to have a veto over my future.
Exactly.
So, when you and I run small organizations that are trying to put together, offerings for others, we realize that the larger the number of people who support that particular activity, the more independence we have while doing it. एक स्पॉन्सर आपको इंडिपेंडेंस नहीं देगा, 100 लोग मिल जाएंगे. अगर आपके पास 100 स्पॉन्सर होंगे, आपको सारी इंडिपेंडेंस मिल जाएगी. Sometimes you have to have a larger, wider and more dense framework of international engagements to truly be able to protect what is dear to you. So for me, Atmanirbharta is about redoubling our efforts, redoubling our global partnerships, finding our sources for minerals and materials, finding new sources for services and ideas, sending and investing in other knowledge centers around the world so that we have choices. I think choices is Atmanirbharta. The ability to choose is self-reliance. And I think that is the idea I was propagating. But on the tech action that has been initiated post Ukraine, we should all be worried. We should all be worried not only on the technology platforms and the cancellation of the public sphere, and if it happens to India, we are 1/6 of humanity. Please understand what we are talking about. You're going to mute 1/6 of humanity if we are to be deplatformed as a country. What has happened to Russia? So that is one part of it. But you should also be worried about certain other frameworks. For example, the SWIFT payment system, right? The weaponization of SWIFT. The capture of your national savings. आप सब लोग बोलते हैं कि हमारी foreign currency reserves इतनी हो गई हैं. Are you in control of those, or can they be usurped by someone else? So that's a question we need to ask. So I think between the pandemic and how we saw the perversion of value chains and supply chains and global behavior of global actors, and the Ukraine war, both the weaponization of food and grains by Russia and the weaponization of everything else by those who were opposing Russia, you see that many of us should not feel that sanguine about our world today. We should really be thinking on how do we invest in the right partners, how do we build a framework of trusted engagements, how do we move away from this universal trading arrangements to niche and integrity and trust-based partnerships. We will all have to rethink the format. Globalization as we knew it is over, Kushal. I think what you're going to see emerge from these two activities these two incidents, one which is ongoing, the pandemic, the second which is likely to go on for a while now. I think the wounds in Europe are not going to subside that soon or that quickly. We are going to have to navigate this quasi-bipolarity resulting from Ukraine and living with the COVID, and therefore certain skews in terms of access to the right to life itself has been challenged by the pandemic. Some people deserve to live more than others. Basically, that was the message coming out of the pandemic. That if you are earning $100,000 and living in these 25 countries, you are likely to be catered to. The rest, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you are always only a part of our global industry, never co-owners of the globalization project. Sorry, again a
Yeah.
wrong answer.
No. That is so true. Just think about it, right? We use all these tech platforms. All their servers are outside India. All our data is outside India. I mean, to begin with, we may have to start by making these people, get our data at least in our country. कम से कम हमारी data privacy तो शुरू करें. वो भी अभी तक नहीं हुई है. By the way, हमारे देश में अब तक वो भी नहीं हुई है. Now I get it. There are multiple issues when it gets to tech, right? This is something like Twitter. अभी उसमें नेटवर्क एक्सटर्नैलिटीज का इशू आ जाता है कि एवरीबडी इज ओवर देयर एंड द थिंग अबाउट दीज टेक प्लेटफॉर्म्स इज बिकॉज एवरीबडी इज ओवर देयर इज व्हाट मेक्स देम अट्रैक्टिव. सो चाइना, द चाइनीज मॉडल एट द एंड ऑफ द डे, इट जस्ट क्रिएट्स एन इंसुलर वर्ल्ड. वी गेट ऑल ऑफ दैट, and you correctly said we are not talking about shutting them down. We're talking about how do we leverage them for our benefit and their benefit. And right now this so-called, to use Rajiv Malhotra's word in his book Being Different, this sameness that we're talking about in this global order is one-sided. We're all the same, but the sameness is decided by them. हम उनके जैसे बने तो हम सेम है. जरा भी हमने बोल दिया ना, अभी पैंडेमिक की पूरी जर्नी देखो. पैंडेमिक की बिगिनिंग में आपने अगर लैब लीक थियरी को डिस्कस कर लिया, आपका ट्विटर, आपका फेसबुक, आपका इंस्टाग्राम, आपका यूट्यूब, चारों बंद हो जाना था. 1.5 साल बाद जी ये लोग खुद लैब लीक थियरी पेल रहे हैं, उनकी पॉलिसी चेंज हो जाती है फिर, और हर चीज में ऐसे कुछ ना कुछ चेंज होता रहता है. सो दिस इज नॉट अ प्लूरल वर्ल्ड. दिस इज अ वर्ल्ड वेयर वैल्यूज आर जेन्युइनली बीइंग पुश्ड फ्रॉम अ टॉप and they are and it's not, what the funny part is, it's not even a representative sample of the value system of those countries itself. Because it's not like everybody in America did not want to talk about the lab leak. It's not like everybody in America supports this kind of extreme cancel culture. There is an alternative to that too. But it is just a stranglehold of this minority in the tech world. And that tech world is, so for some weird reason, in cahoots with a particular political ideology in the United States of America, and they are shoving it down everyone's throat. But now I want to segue into the other part, which you had mentioned about these technologies itself. Now, Jonathan Haidt, a very good professor, he has recently come up with, a paper which was touching about a lot of things that you're talking about. You're talking about the damage itself of these platforms. In fact, Jonathan Haidt has been saying this again and again and again, that especially Instagram, in terms of its impact on young girls, it is something that every parent who is a father, mother of young girls should be worried. And he shares a lot of data about it. So let us talk about these technologies itself. Now, in one way, Sameer, the advantage of this technology is, the beauty is, अब आप एक अलग शहर में हो, मैं एक अलग शहर में हूँ, but we can host these chats right now and have these conversations because of these very platforms itself. But the downside is, but the thing is, here we have time. You can make your point in 12 minutes. But when I reduce your view to 280 characters or 400 characters or 600 characters, and then I insert the clickbait element where, I might have a policy on my podcast that I will not do clickbait. But the point is, in today's world, let me tell you, as a content creator, if you want to be successful, you just have to see what hashtag is trending on YouTube or Twitter, and you literally make something about that, और उसी के बारे में बात करते हैं. And lo and behold, what is trending over there? Something that polarizes society. So tell me, how do we deal with this conundrum?
नहीं, देखो, पहले तो कुशल, I would like to go back to that sameness point you made. Listen, I have views on that, and I don't want to hijack this conversation and go into that discussion. But let me put it this way. Even in my opening comments, when I welcomed everyone to the Raisina this year, I spoke about something which I hope others got the message. But I was maybe being too shy and I was not hammering the point. I did not have a clickbait line for people to understand, so they didn't dive deep into what I really wanted to say. What I basically said, Raisina is an arena that celebrates diversity. We have 100 people, multiple ideologies, multiple ideas. Let's talk. If we want a common future, to be stable, prosperous, and kind to all of us, celebrate diversity. हम सेम नहीं है बॉस, लेट्स लीव इट. अगर हम सेम होते, मैं आपका कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अडॉप्ट कर लेता, मैं अपना नहीं लिखता. The fact is that since all of us have given ourselves our own independent political regime systems and architectures, we have all agreed that we are not the same. So now please don't try to homogenize the world in one format. We could be similar. We could have similar aspirations. We could have similar ambitions, right? But we are not same. And I think our evolution as a species has been successful so far because we have not been same. It is our diversity of stock, of ideas, of innovations, of ambitions, of directions that has kept us alive as a species. We don't want to be one, right? What we do want is some common ground where we can all collaborate and build a planet, save some global public goods, cater to public bads, and respond to challenges together. So for that, we had experimented with this global governance institution called the UN. And you could argue that it has been both a success and somewhat it has also failed in dispensing everything that it was designed for. But the idea was that because we were nations having our own political and ideological assessments of the world, we would meet in a common room to discuss what we all had to attend to together. But the idea that somehow we are all same, and because we are on Facebook, we will remain same, and because we are on Twitter, we should have the same freedom of expression guidelines. I mean, you and I differ on it, right? Even though we may be adjacent in terms of locality and neighbors, you and I may have very different views on what is freedom of expression, what is free speech, where should it begin, where should it end. We will have different assessments even within societies. Like you said, it is not an American culture. It is America is not that homogeneous itself that it has a stream or Europe for that matter. So I think this whole premium on being same and having this whole layer that binds us, which is common and homogeneous, is dangerous. I think if the world needs peace, prosperity, and needs to walk together, we have to celebrate our differences. We have to celebrate our diversity. We are not the same. If we, like I always tell people, if I was same as you, I would have said, okay, American Constitution also works for India. So let's just make it our Constitution. It is not, right? So we have differences. So that is one. I think sameness is a very dangerous goal to chase and a recipe for disaster. Diversity is a better framework. And working together with this diversity is certainly an essential project for the future. That how do we take differently placed folks and respond to common planetary ambitions or societal ambitions or regional ambitions? I think that should be the project, not by saying that we are all similar, but by acknowledging that we are different, and yet we have common challenges to address, and we have common pools of resources to share. We have the same air to breathe, and we have a same planet to protect. So I think this overarching maximalist attempt to make everyone similar is dangerous. Having a common minimum program in a coalition party type might be a better way of managing the world of the future. We have a common minimum program where we will all align. And in that sense, many of the successes of the UN were based on that. The non-proliferation architecture, the agreement on protecting children, on women, etc., human rights, etc. They were all based on this framework. We all signed those human rights documents. We all are in breach of it. Everyone who signed it, everyone, no country has not breached it. But we agreed that these are good standards to aspire to. We will walk our own ways to get there, right? So they did not decide what for the media freedoms I would. The media laws, my broadcasting ministry will frame in Sri Lanka, or another one in Pakistan, or another one in India, or another one in different countries. We all had a degree of flexibility, even as we decided to adopt a common minimum framework of progress. And I think that common minimum program that celebrates diversity is a great idea. Now, coming back to the tech harms, I think there are three problems here, Kushal. The first challenge is that the business model by design promotes anger, hate, frivolous behavior, humor, pornography, and a few other content features, and therefore they are privileged over others in terms of the legs they have. So by design, this industry is taking us to the, if not dark zone, but at least the gray zones of human existence. And the gray zones have been privileged over sunlight in this industry. So sunlight does not work that well. The gray certainly does better, and that is a design feature. Maybe we stumbled upon it, or maybe we did not do enough thinking before we allowed it. Let me give you an example. Even when we were losing lives because of the pandemic. The vaccines were not allowed to be commercial before they were tested. First test, second test, third test, then commercial. हमने थोड़े लोगों पे किया, बड़े लोगों, ज्यादा लोगों पे किया, फिर population scale पे ले गए, right? We had these layers. No technology should be allowed to be part of our society unless it passes these 3 stress tests. Do a sandbox, do a pilot, and then take it to population scale. We have allowed coders who have no sense of social sciences or politics or ethics or morality or human existence to design the societies of our future, and then we say, oh, ye kya hua? Boss, unne to kabhi socha bhi nahi tha. This was never part of their design framework. Their design framework was कि कुशलमेहरा को मैं ये podcast का addict कैसे बनाऊं, then they've succeeded. So if their objective was that every second person should run his podcast, they're doing well. If their objective was the podcast has to talk about certain kind of things, they never thought about that. So don't tell me that सारे podcasts are only talking about a issue. Their design basis was never to have evolved conversations. Their design basis was to first make people having their own podcast easy and selling podcasts that more people watch, and to get podcasts who more people hear is going to privilege certain kind of information over others. That was the design basis. It was not to improve the quality of conversation in podcasts. It was to have more people hooked on to podcasts. I think let's be very clear. Now, one of my friends, Marichya Shake, was asked once, she was a member of European Parliament and now she's heading a center in Stanford. She was asked, do politicians understand technology? I liked what she replied. She says, do engineers understand politics? And I think that is, I think it was a great answer. Do they understand what they are doing to our societies, to our politics, to our people? None of our technology products have passed the stress test of whether they lead to good politics, whether they lead to knowledge creation, whether they lead to more evolved human thinking and action. They don't pass stress tests, right? So when they have never considered these as essential to design, why are you surprised if depraved human behavior is privileged over evolved human thinking? So why are we so surprised, right? So that's on one part of tech. That tech by design ignores or is ambivalent or is agnostic to many concerns you have voiced here. No designer has thought about any of this while creating a product that captures eyeballs, attention, and wallets. Their purpose is not what you have just listed as the challenges that we are facing today. That's the first part of it. And I believe we have to take past this prologue. Let's go back into history. The greatest innovations, discoveries, scientific discoveries, Earth is not the center of the universe, for example, or gravity or theory of relativity. All of these great folks who contributed in our evolution and understanding of sciences were accompanied by great thinkers of their time. Ab kaun hai boss? Ab to columnist hai, Twitters hai. We have Twitter thinkers. People forget that from Newton to Einstein, they were all accompanied by profound thinkers who were contributing to furthering social sciences at that period, sociology at that time, philosophy at that time, human behavior. So I think we have to invest in social sciences. If we want the golden age of technology, we have to have a golden age of social sciences. Otherwise, technology will always conflict and contest some of the social spaces that need to be preserved and protected. And I think unless we invest in building a cadre of folks who decipher, who deconstruct, who do critical analysis of many of these platforms and inventions, we will continue to struggle to have cohesive societies that are at peace with themselves. Forget about peace with others. Every democracy is having an internal silent revolution today. हमें किसी और से लड़ाई नहीं करनी है. It's a do it yourself. We are all IKEA stores. We are doing it ourselves. We don't need, the Chinese only have to come and chodo fuljadi in. We are, they have to only exploit and game our democracies and our divisions and our polarizations and our differences. That's all they have to do. So they don't have to send any regiments inside. They just need to game our public sphere. And I'm just picking them out, but the fact is anyone can do this. You could have our neighbor in the east, a neighbor in the west. We could have a country which is far away from us, and vice versa. We can all game each other's grievances. We have become a collective of grievances. Everyone is a victim. everyone is hurt, everyone has been excluded and cancelled. Everyone believes that we are victims. We are a society of victims. And why? Because we have been able to find at least 10 more people who have retweeted a tweet saying that I'm a victim for so and so reason. So we have all been able to in some sense confirm our worst fears, because we have got at least 10 more people who also feel that way about the world, right? So we are in a world where we require to really reflect on how technologies need to be integrated into our lives. I call it the vaccine test. We must put technology through the same social testing, population scale testing before they are commercialized. And we must have the same ratings on it for adults, for 18, for 13. कुछ हमारा एक system होना चाहिए, so that is one part of it. The second part is, Kushal, that we are also losing our youth very early. When I was growing up and I was 12 and 13 and I used to come back, हमारे दादाजी होते थे, उनके भाई होते थे, दादी होती थी, उनकी बहनें होती थी, हमें कहानियां सुनाती थी. We learned about lives through their stories and tales. What was good, what was bad, what is nice, what should be avoided, what should be done, etc., etc. People whispered in our ears through our formative days, and eventually we inculcated some of those, we rejected some of those, we adapted and innovated on others, etc., etc., etc. Today, by the time you're 12, Insta tells you what the world is, boss. 12 साल की उम्र में your stimulus from the world comes to you from your WhatsApp and Insta and messengers and Snapchat and whatnot. They tell you what the world is. If the world, if they see images of a particular way, they want to shape themselves in that way. If they see certain kind of aggressive, boorish behavior, they think that is very cool. If they see certain other kind of behavior, they get attached to that. I say this seriously. Institutions like ours, think tanks like ours, we leave it too late. By the time we go to people in their colleges and get them as interns or go to their universities and give talks and engage with them, it's too late. We have to go down to school. We have to talk to the person before he gets a smartphone, and we have to tell them about everything that you hear on the smartphone is not true. Everything that you hear on the smartphone is not necessarily attractive or good for life, right? So I think that is the second part. Technology too early is like allowing an 8-year-old to drive a Mercedes Benz, and I think that is something that we are still avoiding tackling. And because parents are busy and because technology gives them free time from their wards, everyone basically throws an electronic device at their kids. Take a smartphone, no, take iPad, no, take Mac. We have put them on an escalating ladder to get more perverted by technology stimulus rather than human stimulus. So I think we are beginning to see this affect many of us. And by the way, let me also say something which is positive on this part. We have seen many of these young people take up really, really good causes. We've also seen that. We've seen an emergence of a whole new citizenry. My challenge is that was by chance. People chose technology and used it to do something good. That happened as a coincidence. We didn't design for it as elders or as people who are working in the sector or in this field. It happened by chance. Like what happens bad is also by chance. These are uncurated, chaotic outcomes. They're not thought through. I think we need to go down to school and we need to see that technology is increasingly used beneficially by these young people, and we are able to talk to them and catch them early enough to basically, my mother used to hold my hand and cross the ring road in front of my house before I turned 13 and I could do it on my own. 11-12 tak someone used to help me cross that very, very crowded main thoroughfare in front of my home. So we used to, we were told how to cross the road. I think the same thing happens on technology as well. We have to learn how to cross the road before we are given a car to drive on that same street. Today you're driving a car, forget about crossing the road. So I think that's the second thing, that what is the relationship of our youth with technology, and have we allowed them to be put into danger's way because we have been careless on this. And the third and the final point on tech, Kushal, is on how do we in many ways regulate tech. And I think that remains the $1 million question, right? And let me be very clear here. Every country in the world today is trying to find a framework for regulating tech. We all understand it is dangerous. We are all enjoying the valuations that come out of tech. We don't want to, upset the apple cart, as it were. But we all are trying to think about how do we regulate tech. Now, what is good regulation? What is bad regulation remains the $1 million question on technology as we go ahead. And I think India will have to find its own model. India cannot choose the American one or the Chinese one or the European one. We are different. Like I said, we are not the same. We are not the same even when it comes to our digital constitutions or our digital arrangements. We will have to come up with an India way. And I think this is something that we need to really, really invest in if we need a digital India that really transforms and serves its own people.
All right. So one last question before I let you go, and we'll wrap it up again with Raisina. What were the key takeaways and lessons for you, even as a consumer? I know you're a curator, but as a consumer of information that you gathered this time at Raisina.
So, as okay, I'll break it into two parts. One is what I think I can speak confidently about. Second is a conjecture. I can confidently say that many people, most people who would be around my age group, coming from similar profession, background, etc., people like us, my age group, etc., were really happy to be back meeting in person. I think for them, it was special because this was like the first big global gathering post or with COVID, with Ukraine happening at the same time, and rather than exchange tirades on Twitter and have a digital war, we could actually argue face to face, and there's a very different texture. So I think people being together is essential. We must never lose track of this particular important human aspect. Face to face and meeting in person is very different compared to the digital worlds you and I are inhabiting right now over this podcast. It is not the same. Don't allow anyone who sells technology to tell you otherwise. Meeting in person is important. It humanizes us. It removes the edges. We are more respectful. We are more empathetic. Digital distances us. It makes us cold. It makes us less receptive to other ideas, and we are able to find 10 other fools who agree with us. So in person cannot be replaced. First takeaway that we have to continue to be investing in in-person platforms going ahead. The first takeaway. Second, of course, was that geography matters. Whoever came from Europe, whether they were talking on water or climate or connectivity projects or infrastructure, Ukraine was the only thing they spoke about. It doesn't matter what we were discussing. The Europeans were absolutely focused on somehow bringing in that particular issue in every debate that we had. We had 3 or 4 Europe panels, but we had many others. And you could find that irrespective of which discussion was taking place at that particular point of time, Ukraine was invoked. So I think we have to realize that there is today, courtesy our digital experiences of the last 2 years, there is a hashtag mobilization even in the real. People now sometimes start performing like they would have done on Twitter. यानी हमें तो एक यूक्रेन की ट्वीट डालनी है, बाद में हम जो भी डालें, दिन में हम जो भी डालें, एक यूक्रेन की लाइन बोलनी है हमें, या हमें जो भी हमारा उस टाइम का फेवरेट पेट पीव है उसकी एक लाइन डालनी है, बाकी हम फिर कुछ और किसी और की बातें करें. So you could see this. You could see that digital performance affecting human engagement even in person. For me, that was really remarkable. And I'm now thinking that how can this be actually tapped and leveraged to create a hybrid experience? Not कि कई लोग ऊपर बैठे, कई लोग नीचे बैठे. How do we create a hybrid conversation and hybrid experience while we meet in person? Because there is a part of us that has got attached to what is online, Kushal. My second learning was that 1 hour long 5 people conversations may not be that appealing anymore. We will have to give certain digital stimuli to folks who have got used to some of these mediums, and I'm thinking about that. That was the second takeaway, that conferences of the future in next 2 to 3 years are going to feel and look very different to conferences of the past. I think the nature of how we arrange these debates is going to be different. And the third and final takeaway for me, besides the challenge, is that we have to find ways of changing the guest list. I think the digital voices that have emerged in the last 2 years, as we were all locked in and locked up or locked down, whichever word you like using, have to find place in many of these in real conversations as well. Some of them have really contributed to our journeys through these past months, and they have to be made part of these in real conversations as well. We tried to do that. We can do better, and I think it is time to bring some of these new, young, different voices and put them on the stage. I did bring some of those, and I did, in fact, make sure that even when we were doing a marquee panel, we had a couple of different voices sitting there on the stage with ministers, etc., etc. And I think we need to do more of that. It makes a much more interesting viewing. Wherever I had more than 2 or 3 ministers in a panel, it was kind of performer. Wherever I had a good mix, you saw officialdom clash with innovation. And I think officialdom clash with innovation is good viewership and also leads to better outcomes, better thinking, and progress for these kind of events. So I think my learnings are that we have to do better. We have to be more innovative. I think we have a good platform in Raisina, which is, like I said, liberal, Indian liberal. We will bring people in, we will give them a mic, we will hear them. We don't have to agree with them, but we will still hear them. And I think that has to be defended. The defense of diversity must remain an essential feature going ahead. And we must not allow the binaries of the digital to infect the pluralism of the real. And in that sense, that is the other learning, that we have to continue to keep that alive.
Perfect. I think I could not have summed it up in a better way. I think you put it perfectly when you said the binaries of the digital should not affect the pluralism of the real world. That is something that I personally try to, fight for in my own way through my platform. And I'm glad to hear you talking about it and persevering to sustain that. So Samir, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast.
थैंक्स कुशल, बहुत लंबा था, थोड़ा छोटा कर देना बॉस. बहुत लंबा.
छोटा नहीं होता, ये प्लेटफॉर्म लंबी चैट्स के लिए है. So guys, we'll wrap today's discussion up. When you, it doesn't matter if you're listening to this on Spotify, iTunes, or you're watching this on YouTube. In the description of the podcast will be the link to ORF's YouTube channel, Sameer's Twitter handle, ORF's Twitter handle. Please go, and even ORF's website will be there. Please go and check out the content. They hold amazing discussions. You get to learn a lot from these discussions, and this is the kind of discourse that we need to be supporting. We need to get out of the clickbait world and get into real chats, something that I strive to do on this channel too, but I think I alone can't do it, and ORF does a far better job and a much grander scale. So please go and subscribe to them, and please subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast, like this video, leave your comments in the comment section, and you can also support it by becoming a member on Patreon or YouTube, or buying the merch, or through UPI. I will see you guys next time. Until then, take care. Goodbye.